Hey guys, what is happening? Welcome back. It is Teasdale here, and this time I've got a little bit of a different video for you. I thought I'd best try and make these videos a bit more chill, a bit shorter, because obviously a bit more engaging too, because obviously my videos, the league runs, and they're not usually aggro decks, they're more mid-rangey, janky piles, so they are quite long videos. So I thought what I best do is make a smaller video, shorter video. It is the Christmas period. Little bit of time for people to obviously fit it in and just engage more in the holiday kind of time. Obviously, it's not really a Christmas video. We have got the Christmas jumper, but that is all. Other than that, basically what this video is we are going to rank all of the decks, Pauper decks, currently at this moment in time, what I've classed as Pauper decks. Obviously, I've probably missed some here and there. You know, some of them aren't probably as, prevalent as others. Some you might not know. Obviously, they're a bit off meta. But we're going to rank these decks. I'm going to rank them in order of, obviously, S tier, the best deck. Tier 1, obviously, fine, good, solid choice. Just not nowhere close to the other, to the S tier. Tier 2, obviously, just coming down from Tier 1. The next one is, you can basically look at stealing a challenge, so I wouldn't consider it Tier 1 or Tier 2, but if the meta's right, if it's there, if there's an opening, it can definitely steal a challenge. Tier 3, getting pretty bad, and then just downright poop. Absolute dog, and do not pick this up, is probably my advice. But, first of all, after getting all that, please check out my handles on this side. If you're here from recommended, please hit that like and subscribe button. Leave a comment down below, especially based on this. If you agree or disagree or think I'm talking shit, all that sort of stuff, just let me know in the comments below. And check me out on Twitter. I'm fairly active on Twitter. And I'm fairly active in the Discords as well for Pauper. So without further ado, let's dive right in.
It's Pauper time.
So guys, let's make this a little bit bigger for yourselves. Hopefully, should be able to see that. So, as we can see, we have S tier, which is the best of the best, probably considered too good. These are the deck or decks you should be playing. Tier 1, obviously very good, very solid choice. Just a big jump between S and 1. Tier 2, obviously further down than Tier 1. Tier can steal a challenge is basically like, it's not really bad, it's not really good, it's just very, I would say it's very glass cannony. If the meta's right, if it hits it just right, you can steal a challenge easily. Other than that, I wouldn't say it was like a contender. You wouldn't have sideboard hit for it, you wouldn't, all that sort of stuff is probably where I would put that. Tier 3 is obviously a lot worse, probably your jank combo decks, all that sort of stuff, and then dog, poop, or poop in general, just don't play this deck. Do not play it at all. So, without further ado, let's begin. We start with Acid Trip or Blue-White Blink. Basically, obviously a Blue-White Flicker deck with Reality Acid and Spreading Seas. Tries to disrupt the opponent and kill them with Core Skyfisher and Dreamstalker. All that sort of stuff. This deck's poo. Do not play this deck. This deck is bad. It is a meme. If you're playing in tournament practice, you'll probably play 10 games against it and it'll look like the greatest deck in the world. But other than that, please do not play this deck. This deck is fun. If you're wanting some fun, it is very fun to play because you get to destroy everything your opponent is doing. And it is hilarious and you have fun with it. Other than that, it's not that good. It is really not. I could see potentially Tier 3 with maybe 1 or 2 more downshifts or new cards, but currently this deck is here. Affinity. This deck's poo. This deck should not be. This deck. Do not play this deck. But no, in all seriousness, this is easily S tier. This to me is probably, it's either the best deck or in contender for the best deck in the game, and has been, I would say, arguably for the best part of, well, definitely this year. And if not half of last year. I can't remember when Modern Horizons 2 was to make that many sets now. But it is definitely been the best deck. It's took a while for obviously a lot of cards to be figured out, numbers to be figured out, and it keeps getting new toys. Obviously, there's different builds now with Kenku, without Kenku, with Gixian Infiltrator. Sometimes you run counter spells, sometimes you don't, sometimes you run preordained, sometimes you don't. All these sort of... It's got so many options. So many options that basically it literally doesn't matter what the last 10 cards in your deck are. The rest of the shell will absolutely terrorize your opponent. But other than that, I think this is arguably one of the best decks in the game right now, and will be for a long time until something changes. Blackburn, I'd probably put it in tier 3, is where I'd put this. I could see it going up with maybe a couple... I could definitely see it stealing a challenge if the timing is right. But for the most part, I do think it is tier 3. I don't think this deck's very good. Black Sacrifice, this deck is pretty poor. I'm not a fan of this deck at all. It needs too many cogs to work for very little gain. Like, it has a lot of toys. Obviously, it's got Carrion Feeder, Mortician Beetle. Obviously, it's got new additions, all that sort of stuff. But its payoffs aren't that good. Like, single threats that go big aren't really what you need, and they don't go big as quickly as you'd like them to. So they're generally not very good in that sense. Moving on is Bogles. I feel like I could put this in here, and I think for the most part, it is definitely can steal the challenge, because it does need that hit to come down. It needs the field to be right, but I do personally feel at the moment it's probably tier 2. With Tron being about, obviously Affinity and things like that being around, that it's kind of just there, and it can go underneath a lot of decks. With also having access to potentially a lot of life gain. So I do think it is it's a solid tier 2 at the moment, I would say. Moving on, this is Boros Bully. So this is more like the Seeker of the Way, the Battle Screech, Prismatic Strands, proper old school style. Could potentially run Sacred Cat, all that sort of stuff. I'd probably at the moment put this in can steal a challenge, but it's not very out there. It's not an amazing deck at the moment, but it can definitely steal a challenge. It all depends on how little graveyard hit there is, i.e. how much terror you're seeing, all that sort of stuff in the metagame, versus also how good Strands is. So the better Strands is, the better this deck is. I feel like, and obviously currently it does receive a lot of splash damage from other hate cards in the meta. Suffocating Fumes, all that sort of stuff, all the -1 stuff. So I can definitely see this being put in tier 3, but in general, I definitely would say currently you could probably steal a chance if it's right. Moving on, this is Boros Synth or Kuldotha Synth. I'd probably put this in the bottom end of... Would I put this in the bottom end of tier 2? I haven't obviously been through this at the moment. I'm doing this as I'm going through it. I'd probably put this in potentially tier 2. I could see this in all 3 of these. I do think it's better served than Bully itself. So that'll make me think I want to put this here. I think what I would do is I'd probably do this overall. Move this down to tier 3. But it can definitely win. Can definitely steal the challenge. But it's a lot worse with obviously Kuldotha and Affinity being around. It's a lot harder to take that, I would say. Where I do feel like Synth versions just have that much better draw engine, threat package. The hate is less important. So imagine you go Battle Screech into Flashback Battle Screech, they go Fumes or Cannonade or Kill Your Board, whatever. And you just basically, that's kind of it. You've lost a lot of your engine. You've overcommitted on your Squadron Hawks. You've overcommitted on your Guardians. All this sort of stuff. You've lost quite a lot. You usually gain a lot back from Kuldotha Rebirth and Synths and all that sort of stuff with your Core Skyfish, your Glinnox. It's less hateful. You don't really fall into that trap. You get around some of the hate that Affinity runs with Crackle and Charm and all that sort of stuff. So I do think it's a lot better positioned than Boros Bully, but still, I'd probably put them very, very similar, just slightly above. Just trying to reiterate the point that Synth is probably slightly better than Bully. Black Red Madness, I would say this is obviously using the Faithless Luton, Kitchen Imps, Epicure kind of engines. I put this in a solid tier 2. It is definitely a solid choice. It is obviously an aggro deck that gains a lot of advantage, similar to Cold Author. It does it in a different way than Cold Author, so it doesn't receive a lot of the hate. It does have that little bit of life gain too while doing it, with that life gain with Arms of the Vein, Vampire's Kiss, Sovereign's Bite. I didn't run Sovereign's Bite, ignore me, but basically Vampire's Kiss and Arms, that you kind of get that life gain. You can obviously further that if you need to with Unexpected Fangs, all that sort of stuff. There is different routes, so you do gain that life gain, you do get the card advantage, and you are a very aggressive deck. So I do think it is a solid choice at the moment. It's obviously not up there, it's not tier 1, it's definitely nowhere close to S tier. I definitely do think it is a solid choice though. I'd probably put it in tier 2. This deck is the Black-White Flicker deck. So the deck that won a challenge probably at the start of December, end of November, with the Pegasus, the initiative cards, the running the new prototypes, that sort of stuff. And it was basically just a black-white value flicker deck. Kind of won a challenge, and kind of, to me, from my personal experience, from gameplay, results, it kind of just fell off. So I definitely probably put this in. I do think it's pretty well positioned. The colour choices, black and white, are obviously really solid at the moment. You obviously got Dust to Dust, you got Chainers. You have life gain. You do have all that sort of solid card choices and colour choices and options to easily steal a challenge if that meta is just that right. But I'd probably put this in can steal a challenge, and it's not really a meta deck, it's just there. And it kind of exists in the background, potentially stealing challenges here and there. Moving on. This is Corgate, so obviously the blue-white Corgate, the Esper Corgate, the using the Basilisk Gates and Squadron Hawks with Guardian of the Guild Pack value, or sometimes now not. I'd put that solidly in tier 1. It is definitely fair, very powerful deck. Strong. It seems to have almost fell off the map almost for me. I've not versed it in a long time. I haven't really seen it that heavily in challenges, not that I've dug deep looking for it, but I haven't really seen it, but it is definitely still a solid choice. It's probably fell off a little bit with a lot of the Fume hate and things like that. It has definitely got a lot of hate, like splash damage hate from Cold Author and things, but it is definitely a solid choice. The deck is still super strong, but I think a lot of it as well could be its play patterns are super boring. In my experience, the play patterns just aren't there, and they are very similar to other decks which just seem not stronger, but maybe get less splash damage to people boarding in for this and that and all that sort of stuff. And I just feel like it is good, very solid deck, and can definitely still a strong contender. It just seems to have, personally, in my experience, fell off the map in leagues and challenges that I have seen. But it is what it is. It is definitely still a solid choice, and I wouldn't even bat an eyelid if I considered taking this to an event or play on a challenge. Nowhere close. So this is Combotron. This is like Alter or Eggs or whatever you want to call it. It just cycles through its deck to basically like kill your opponent with munitions or erasure or what, all those kind of, a lot of different variations of that deck. But that's kind of the deck that I've tried to put into this. And I would solidly put it under tier 3. It's a deck that you can't really play on Magic Online. It's very hard, time consuming. You do obviously play really quickly. I can nowhere close play this quickly while playing this deck. It's definitely got a lot of time constraints, but it is still existing in the background. It kind of does things here and there, but it is solidly, it's a tier 3 fun deck to play, and that's kind of where I put it. Next you have Curve, and I'd easily put this in a big solid poop deck. I do like this deck, and I love Curve, and I love having fun with Serpentine Curve, but this deck, like the blue-red Scred control version, or like the Grixis Cleanse and Wildfire version, definitely have their strong points of this is why to play this deck, gets around graveyard hit, yada yada, all these sort of different control aspects, but it's just not that good. It's not doing what the rest of the decks are doing at the top, and it's just clunky and inconsistent, and it just isn't it. It's it's definitely not a solid option. Cycle Storm, obviously a deck that is quite difficult to pilot. It's quite expensive on Magic Online. It has different pros and cons to it. The deck is definitely pretty strong. I would firmly put this into can steal a challenge category. It is not tier 2. It is definitely not trash. It is just that sort of in between. It can definitely steal a challenge if a competent pilot plays it, if the meta hits just right, people forget the graveyard here, all the matchup variants, all that sort of stuff can definitely make this deck steal a challenge. I would definitely probably consider playing this if I had any remote interest in playing those kind of decks. They're not my personal cup of tea, but it's not a janky combo deck that, so I'm not interested in it. It's too fluid and too intricate, and not my kind of deck. But I'd definitely recommend checking people out or play this deck yourself. It is very strong, it can be very powerful, all that sort of stuff. But I can definitely see it being in Can Steal a Challenge, and it's definitely not trash. It is very vulnerable and very weak, but that is probably where I'd put that deck. Moving on to Elves, I'd probably put this in Can Steal a Challenge, is where I'd put this. And the reason is the deck's solid, always very good, always can get around certain hate. It doesn't have to go all in, so it can work around Suffocating Fumes, can work around other hate. It can work around a lot of different things. And if that meta is just right, you verse decks that they're having Weather the Storm instead of Suffocating Fumes, or they're having Life Gain instead of Cannonade. This is where this deck will shine. The better the point blank removal is over the widespread removal, like the Fiery Cannonades, the more cast downs and chainers they are, to me, the better this kind of deck performs. It just goes so wide, so quickly, and can still function on so little mana and so little cards that you need to force it to have it. It can definitely get there, and it can definitely steal a challenge. Definitely. Familiars, another deck at the moment. I'd probably either put this between tier 2 and can steal a challenge. I can definitely see it kind of flitters between based on the pilots. So the deck as a whole, I think, is fairly strong, and I'd definitely consider it putting it in tier 2. But it just has a lot of constraints, a lot of things that make it a lot more difficult to play. It's not an easy deck to play. It's definitely a time-consuming deck, and it can definitely obviously outgrind certain decks like Affinity if it needs to. It does have certain strategies to tackle the tier 1 and the S tier decks, but I would probably say it's overall in the Can Steal a Challenge around about Elves. I'd probably put it further than Elves. I do think this deck is fairly well positioned at the moment, so that is why I think it can steal a challenge, but the Familiars deck is definitely a contender for it. I don't think it actually needs any more cards, because at one point I would have argued that Familiars was one of the best decks in the game, and it was very underrated, and it was just very difficult to play, that people shied away from it. And it might still be the case now. It might still easily be top of tier 2, that is just a hard deck to play, and it's not very well picked up and very well received. But I think a lot of the tier 1 and S tier decks have just got that many new toys, and that much faster, all those sort of things, and Familiars has kind of just existed at this same point for almost X amount of years, where obviously these decks higher have just got those new toys to kind of do things better than it does. So that's kind of why I think it is good, and I would definitely easily see people argue that it is even tier 1 to an extent. I could be swayed that this deck could easily be tier 1. It is just a deck that I personally think has got no real new toys, where all the other decks that are better have got a lot more new toys. This one for me is Mono Garden Control, and as you well know, This deck is I love this deck. This deck is my favourite deck of all time, and I do love it, and I think it's great. If this was my personal choice, without being so serious, I'd easily put this in S tier. This is my favourite deck and pinnacle Magic as it should be played. Unfortunately, there are other decks in the game that are shooting this down, and I would like to say could steal the challenge. That's what I would like to say it is. But I think it is a bit inconsistent, and I'd probably put it... I want to say I put it at the top of tier 3. I could see it going up. Maybe I'm being a bit too harsh on it. I do think it is quite a solid, can be well positioned deck, but I'd probably say tier 3 is where it belongs. It has too many moving cogs, and it needs too many things to go right for this to be a solid option. But I do think it could get lucky and steal a challenge, but for the most part, it is tier 3. Infect. Right at the bottom. This deck sucks. Don't play Infect. It looks cool, looks fancy. Don't play this deck. This deck is bad. Now this one, I struggled to find an image that represented this deck. And this is Jeskai, like Ephemerate, Jeskai Kenku, whatever you want to call it. It's like the Wildfire deck. And I do think it is fairly solid. And I kind of think it's probably in the same boat as the Mono Garden Control. It's probably tier 3, maybe steal a challenge. And it kind of just floats around there. That it definitely is not a bad option. It receives a lot of splash damage from Affinity. And also potentially Terror as well. It receives a lot of splash damage from that, and it kind of functions like that because it's got a lot of graveyard here. The Chainers kind of mess up the Ephemerate loops. You've got Dust to Dust, which obviously affects the Wildfire land, the bridges. So it kind of just sits there. And I think that's all I can really say about that. And then this one, which is Jund Wildfire as well, is kind of at the same vein. I think it's pretty much in tier 3. It's not quite there yet. It's missing a few pieces. It's a bit clunky. The mid-rangey deck, the Cascade spells are good, but they're a bit outdated. All that sort of stuff. This one's an interesting one. A deck that I haven't actually seen for a while. I personally haven't versed it in a long time. And I think it's probably... I feel like it's just the bottom of tier 3. I'm not saying it's not a strong deck, because in all honesty, I actually don't know where to put this. I haven't played it against the new meta of, like, obviously, Terror or all this sort of stuff. I actually have no idea. It might easily be can steal a challenge. It easily could see that. But I probably firmly think it is just in tier 3 / can steal a challenge. It needs too many cogs to work when there's other decks that just do this better. Is probably where I'd put it. It's like an option that's there. It's like playing Boros Bully when you can play Boros Synth. You just wouldn't really do that, to be honest, because you know they are similar, but they're just the other deck does it better. And speaking of the other deck, Kuldotha Burn or Kuldotha Red. This is easily S tier. This is the only argument to make, is which one's better. I personally think they are both very, very good. Obviously, Kuldotha is the most represented deck. I don't necessarily say it's the best deck, because I think Affinity's, I would personally say, I think Affinity's probably better. But if Kuldotha Red is just easily the most represented deck. It's so aggressive, it's so fast, it's so strong, and it's the best aggro deck by far. It's not even close. You get so much value off all your cards. You deal so much damage so quickly off all your cards. You don't commit too much from the damage output, all that sort of stuff. And it's very even through hate, whether Suffocating Fumes, Arms, Smash, whatever sort of hate you want to kind of throw at it, it can go under and over it at the same time. So it can definitely, it's a very, very strong one, and overloading and expecting drawing 2 Lone Missionaries or drawing 1 Weather or, you know, drawing 1 Suffocating Fumes, you're going to win the game. That is not going to happen. You must overboard for this deck, and you can get the sense that when Affinity was at its peak, you had to have 4 Dust to Dust, X amount of Blue Elemental Blast, so many more Revokes, and you just got these big powerhouses of... You can't expect the first Dust to Dust to kill your opponent. You can't expect the second Dust to Dust to kill your opponent. And it's kind of the same vein that you basically... The first Weather's just going to keep you alive. The second Weather's maybe going to bury them. But for the most part, you need multiple sideboard cards to be seen, be impactful, to even get a chance with this deck. And it's arguably S tier. Like, not even close. My next deck is Mardu Synth. It's a deck that's kind of here and there. And it's very strong, very well positioned, depending if the meta's right. And I do probably think it's probably I would personally say probably the bottom of tier 2. It's kind of not popular. And it's just as popular as these, I would say. But it is very strong, I would say. Because depending on how much Terror you expect, depending on how much Corgate you expect, depending on how much Affinity you expect, depending on how much Cold Author you can... This deck can fight these decks all at the same time with very little changes to its configuration. So that makes, to me, it very much quite a strong deck, quite strong contender for probably tier 2. Maybe even arguably the top of tier 2. I can definitely see that. I have no issues with that. I also have no issues with potentially putting this in the top of Can Steal the Challenge. But personally, I do think it's probably around tier 2. Moving on. Traditional mono black control. This is your Chittering Rats, your Phyrexian Rages into your Garys or Grey Merchant of Asphodels, into the Witches, all that sort of stuff. Don't play this deck. This deck is terrible. I don't care what Reddit says. I don't care what other people say. Mono black control sucks. It is not good. Its new toys still suck. If you're going to play any form of mono black deck, play this deck. Garden Control is infinitely better because while they're sitting there playing Signing Blood and losing 2 to draw 2, I'm sacrificing my Wellspring, drawing 2 cards, drawing 3 cards, getting a treasure, killing all your board, and all that sort of stuff. It's just, to me, it's just a much better, I would say it's more of an updated version of Mono Black Control, and this deck kind of exists because people won't let go. This is Mogwart, or the Goblin combo, the Putrid Goblin Skirk Prospector First Day of Class combo. And this deck is easily Steal a Challenge. It is very strong and it can get you off guard, depending on how much hate you get. All that sort of stuff, I feel like it can definitely be a solid option. It could definitely come out of nowhere, all that sort of stuff. I could arguably put this in tier 2, but I feel like it does fall a bit into certain about like hate between these, between a couple of the decks, at the top spot, that you kind of like. But it is a hard deck to play, and a hard deck to play around as well, so that's why I feel like it's definitely a strong contender, that if the meta's right, if the matchups are right, it can definitely steal a challenge. But I could argue it is definitely in tier 2. Mono Blue Fae. I feel like out of all the Fae decks, I could arguably see this stealing a challenge, but I don't think Fae exists enough to be put anywhere other than tier 3. It is definitely probably I'd probably say the best consideration for Fae at the moment, in my personal opinion, because it just goes so wide. You can then all you need to bother about is these singular cards, the fumes, the hate cards that you expect, that you get splash damage from, like Cold Author Rebirth or for your Corgate hit or whatever. And you just need to control the board just a little bit longer just to get through. And you've obviously got certain things like Mutagenic Growth, Spell Stutter, Sprite, Counterspell, all that sort of stuff to kind of deal with the things that you're bothered about. So I actually do think I'm changing my mind. I'm going to put it up in a Can Steal a Challenge. Mono Blue in particular is definitely a consideration. The only thing is, I guess, this is Mono Blue Terror. So Mono Blue Terror is kind of similar in what kind of game style as Blue Black. Obviously it has less threats. It's got Spire Golem, but it is just trying to counter those kind of certain threats, like certain answers, to your like specific threats. So I'd probably put this in Can Steal a Challenge as well, and I'd probably put it higher than I would put it... Yeah, I think I'd put this higher than Mono Blue. Not by much. Probably around here. Something along them lines. I do think they're both fairly okay choices. Like, there's nothing against those. There is probably better options to what you could be doing. Like, I think if you're going to play Mono Blue Fair, there's other options. You might as well play... I'd personally say maybe play something similar like Corgate or Terror or something like that. And if you play Mono Blue again, there's better options. But they are both solid choices. And there's pros and cons to each of them. Mono White Aggro is probably tier 3. Fairly can do its thing strong. But again... It just exists, and the things it's doing, other decks are doing it a lot better. Pestilence is probably in the Consteal challenge. This includes both forms of Pestilence for the likes of, I don't know, the Black-White Pestilence, like with just the Guardian of the Guild Pact, and then there's like the more mid-rangey one with Thraben and Kor Skyfisher. They're both pretty similar in the sense that I do think they're good enough to steal the challenge, but not great, and have to have a certain metagame to kind of fall into that. That's probably where I'd put it. Red Green Ponza, I'd probably put this in... I either think tier 2 or maybe even tier 1. I do think the deck is quite strong, quite popular, and is basically fun police. It has inherent weaknesses, which is kind of why I want to put it in tier 2. Obviously, its threats are a bit medium, they're a bit outdated, like Boredom Party... Boredom Party and Altasaur are kind of a bit medium, they're very high variance. Obviously there's certain matchups where Thermocast and Acid Moss aren't really hitting anything, or aren't really doing anything. And then obviously Avenging Hunter is strong, but it's only one that it can run, and it's like kind of a bit, as I say, high variance. If you are behind, Avenging Hunter is probably not the best one, all that sort of stuff. So that's probably where I put it in. It does have a strong game plan, and it is the fun police, and I'd probably put it in tier 2, probably similar to Bogles, if not around that kind of area. Slivers can steal the challenge. It's a deck that basically, if X amount of removal or X amount of mass removal, all that sort of stuff is on the down tick, all that sort of stuff, if, you know, the cast downs are out, all that sort of whatever, you can kind of prey on that, but after that, it kind of needs the right metagame, is what I'm trying to say. And it kind of probably similar to Pestilence. They're doing things, they're very outdated, there's not really much updated with these lists. But they are quite strong if the metagame's right and the variance hits you. Obviously you are running stuff like Wind and Wail, Lead the Stampede, all that sort of stuff. So, it's kind of there. Mono Green Aggro, or Mono Green Stompy, I can probably... The deck can steal wins. Like, I'm not arguing that any of these decks can't steal wins. I'd probably put it at the bottom of tier... No, I'd probably put it at... No, I'd put it at the bottom of tier 3. Maybe... Yeah, I'd put it at the bottom of tier 3, I think. Because this deck can... Obviously, it still exists. It needs a couple more cards. It needs a couple more tools to kind of get there. Or the power level or the metagame to shift a bit for that. But it needs a lot more than, say, these can steal the challenges to kind of get there. Tyler's Tribe, I'd probably put this again in the Can Steal a Challenge, especially depending on who the pilot is. And also it has got a couple of new toys. It's got like, it's trying the, I've seen a lot of lists trying the, like, is the Bitter Reunion from Brothers War, the enchantment that can give you creatures haste. It definitely has some new tools. It maybe needs some more exploring. If the metagame's right, if certain things are missing, I do think this can basically steal a challenge, and that's probably where it is. Tortured Existence, this deck sucks. Don't play this deck. You'll find it similar to Reality Acid. They'll absolutely be bombarded in tournament practice, but that is kind of it. Your deck needs so many tools. It needs to find the Tortured Existence, and then it needs your opponent not to remove it. It does suffer from graveyard hate, all that sort of stuff, and it's kind of there, and that's probably where it exists, but it's probably not a good one a good thing to play. Is probably where I'd put it. Just don't play it. It's just bad. Traditional Burn. So I do feel like if the metagame's right and your hate is certain things like Suffocating Fumes or whatever, like this can steal a challenge, but in the most part, this is borderline and trash. Like, you just wouldn't really play this if Kuldotha exists. I think I will be nicer to it and just put it in the bottom of tier 3 because it can do what it needs to do with Swift Spear and Thermal Alchemist. It can do stuff, so that's kind of where I think it is. I don't think it's particularly great. I wouldn't really choose it over normal, Kuldotha Red, but I think it's fine. Flickertron, I'd probably put this in around... I feel like I want to say tier 2 is probably where I want to put this. I think the deck is currently finding its feet. Obviously, it's just had Prophetic Prism Band, so it is finding its feet, finding its configuration, and it'll definitely get there. And I do think it is a solid choice. It's putting up some kind of results, some kind of player representation, and I do think it is a solid choice. And eventually, I do think once it is found out, it will probably go to tier 1 / top of tier 2, if it's not already there now. But I do think it is a strong contender at the moment, and is a fairly solid deck choice. I'd probably definitely put it here already. I'd sooner recommend picking this up rather than Bogles. So I guess that's probably where I'd put it. This is Turbo Fog. This is a deck. To me, Turbo Fog is kind of... It reminds me of like Dredge Legacy. It's a deck that kind of falls in at favour, and then people forget the graveyard hit one time, and then it wins an event, and then it kind of just falls out of favour again because people remember the hit. And this deck's solid, annoying to play against, but Flare and Pain and counter spells and interaction, that sort of way, or non-combat based damage decks, all that sort of stuff, just kind of come in and out based on Turbo Fog, and it'll steal a challenge one time, and then it'll kind of just fall out of favour. It is definitely probably up in the top end of can steal a challenge. So, this is Blue-Black Fae, and I just think, in all honesty, I'd probably put this in almost online with Serpentine Curve, but I feel like I can't do that. It's definitely up there with Burn and Kiln Fiend, I guess, and it kind of just exists, but it's not a deck. Like, to be honest, the better the Snuff Out is, the better you're gonna play Terra, and there's just better options than this. Like, if Tron picks up to the point where it's really strong, then yes, this comes up, because I think Fairies generally has a good solid matchup against Tron, obviously being able to deny them a lot of the colours or mana and all that sort of stuff with Map and Prism and countering all the early plays and all that sort of stuff. So I definitely see Fae getting popular depending on Tron. So depending on how Tron does, these kind of go up in like simultaneously. So the better this is, the better this is. So I could easily see this going here in a short while, even kicking out Mono Blue Fae, but for the most part, I think it's pretty much tier 3. It's definitely lower than Mono Blue Fae at the moment. This is the Blue-Black Splash Green Mystical Teachings deck, a deck that kind of falls in and out of favour, and I think the metagame's so open right now, people are trying anything, and this deck's kind of been popping in and out as of late. It does quite well. It's fairly hard to play on Magic Online, but I do think it's probably at the bottom of Concealer Challenge / round here. It's just another option that exists, and it is another control deck that tries to answer everything, and it's probably the best way of trying to answer everything at the same time. Blue-Black Terror. This is easily tier 2, and it's probably, in my opinion, it's arguably the best deck behind these two. I'm not saying that's close. The gap between Kuldotha / Affinity and Terra is a big difference. And I'm not saying that Terra doesn't beat any of them or whatever. I'm just saying in general as a metagame, I do think that it is strong and it's beatable. It's got a good engine. It's got it's got a good threat package and all that sort of stuff. Like, it's definitely a very good, powerful deck. But it's definitely leagues apart the other two decks. The other two decks are so way and above beyond anything else that we could easily be doing. But I do think it's a good, solid option, and I'd recommend taking it to any event. These 4 decks, I wouldn't bat an eyelid at it. We have Blue-Red Fae. Obviously, we've had Mono Blue Fae and Blue-Black Fae. In comparison, this is trash. Like, the the meta, I don't think, would be right. I feel like Blue-Red Fear definitely targets the other kind of similar strategies that it has. So like it's very good against, say, Blue-Black Fear or Mono-Blue Fear or those kind of strategies where you can kind of, counter kind of Delvery style decks, the tempo style decks. It's very good at that because it's got the reach while also having the large removals like the Screds. So and I think that it kind of thrives on that, and it would struggle to beat Terra to the point where it's obviously not that great, and then it's just a worse option than the Blue-Black Fear against, say, something like Tron, in my opinion, anyways. And I feel like that's probably right. I wouldn't recommend picking it up. I would not recommend picking it up at all. I would not recommend picking up Fey in general. Like, I'd maybe potentially pick up Mono Blue, if any, obviously, as you can see by the tier list, but I wouldn't recommend picking it up in general. But it can definitely, that one in particular is definitely a no-go. Walls is an interesting one. It has started to pick up in popularity, and I do think it is quite a reasonable option, and I do think it's probably here, potentially here, is where I'd put it. The deck is strong, and I think it's more the metagame we are currently in, which is making walls like okay. I do think it's on the down tick to the point where it's probably going to here, because I think it's due to walls picking up in popularity because Cracklands was taking a down tick at the time. Removal is basically in the Terra deck, and that's kind of it. You've got pseudo removal in these two decks, but not very much. You've got like the odd spot removal spell here and there, which walls can fight through. So that kind of is probably why it was picking up so much in popularity. And I probably think it is definitely and can steal a challenge, if not bottom end of tier 2. But I do think it's probably on a downtick. Unless the Tron and Walls, which I can't really explain myself because I've never had this matchup previously, the Tron Walls matchup, unless that is popular, and that is another reason why it's been picking up in popularity, then I could easily see it being in tier 2. I have no arguments with that. And then finally, Mono White Heroic. This deck is kind of Bogles, and Bogles and It, to me, whenever I see them, they kind of flicker in and out. If there's a reason why Mono White Heroic is bad, it's usually because Bogles is good. They kind of take advantage of why it would be bad. And then Mono White Heroic, if it's good, Bogles is usually bad because of the very different way that they are similar strategies, but they have pros and cons to each. And generally, I feel like, depending on which one's good, the other one's usually bad. There's no like they both coexist really well at the same time. So because I do think Bogles is quite well positioned at the moment, I do actually think Mono White Heroic is probably pretty poor. I don't really know where to put this on the scale. I'd probably put it around Blackburn, something like this. Yeah, I think somewhere around there is probably a solid option. And that's kind of the tier list, guys. That's obviously all of the decks that I feel like exist in the Pauper Metagame as of this year, especially as of right now. And this is probably where I would put them. I think it's fairly straightforward. I think the argument is definitely between... Obviously, I don't think Tier 1's arguable. I don't think Tier S is arguable easily. I could see maybe I'm a bit too harsh on some of these decks, and I'm definitely probably a bit more lenient on some of these decks. I could easily see these three coming down into probably trash at the moment. I could easily see that. I could easily see Blackburn going in there too. I have no issues with any of those, and that's probably where I'd put them maybe. So I kind of think that's probably where we're at. Let's leave it at that. See how it goes. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and please, if you like this kind of content, please let me know in the comments below. Please let me know in anywhere I've shared it. Just hit me up, because I do really like making these. They are different. If you thought it was too long, if you think I should shorten it, you know, if I need to shut up and stop babbling, fine, all good. But Please let me know what you think in the comments, and hope you guys have a great holiday, and I will see you guys probably in between the new year. I have another video coming, and then that'll be me. I hope you guys have a great holiday. See you guys next time.